Evening, sir. We got a call about… well, we're not entirely sure what we got a call about. The cop, a guy who looked about my age with a mustache that was trying its best, was shielding his eyes. His partner, a weary-looking veteran who probably thought he'd seen it all, was doing the same. Behind them, my neighbor Gary was practically vibrating with self-righteous fury from his driveway, bathed in the otherworldly glow emanating from my backyard. My other neighbor, Brenda Snodgrass, stood beside him, her arms crossed so tightly she was in danger of achieving nuclear fusion. I smiled, holding up a stick with a perfectly browned, slightly gooey marshmallow on the end. The fire in my pit crackled merrily, its cheerful orange light utterly dwarfed by the two massive light towers that were currently turning my quarter-acre of suburban paradise into the brightest spot in the tri-state area. "Evening, officers," I said, my voice calm and professional. "Just utilizing my professional-grade outdoor heating element. Can I offer you a s'more? They're getting perfectly toasted under the 150,000 lumens." The younger cop's mustache twitched. The older one just sighed, a sound that carried the weight of 1,000 domestic disputes. "Sir," he said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Sir, can you please turn off the sun? You're probably wondering how I got here, standing in a backyard brighter than a surgical theater, negotiating with the police over marshmallows while being glared at by the two most powerful people in the Creekwood Estates Homeowners Association. It's a fair question. It all started 3 months ago with a beige envelope, a love for open flames, and a woman named Brenda who had the soul of a DMV clerk. Section 1.2, a man, his castle, his fire pit. 3 months earlier, life was simple. My wife Sarah and I had finally done it. We'd escaped our cramped city apartment and bought a house in the suburbs. A real house, with a lawn you had to mow and a 2-car garage. It was in a development called Creekwood Estates, a name so aggressively pleasant it had to be hiding something. The houses were all tastefully neutral shades of beige and gray, the lawns were greener than a leprechaun's tuxedo, and the silence at night was so profound you could hear your own hair growing. It was perfect. My pride and joy wasn't the house, though. It was the backyard. And in the center of that backyard, on a newly laid stone patio, sat my magnum opus, a Boulder Creek 42-inch wood-burning fire pit. It was a magnificent beast of steel and stone, a veritable altar to the gods of fire and fellowship. I'd spent weeks researching it. I watched hours of YouTube videos of bearded men in flannel shirts extolling its virtues of superior airflow and robust construction. To me, it wasn't just a metal bowl for burning wood. It was a promise of cool autumn nights with friends, of sticky-fingered kids roasting s'mores, of quiet evenings with Sarah, just watching the flames dance. "Are you crying?" Sarah asked, coming out onto the patio with 2 beers. I quickly wiped my eye. "No, just got some patio dust in it." "You've been staring at that thing for 20 minutes, Leo. It's a fire pit, not the monolith from 2001. A space odyssey." "It's more than a fire pit, Sarah. It's a lifestyle," I said with mock seriousness. "It's the heart of the home, the primordial hearth, the nexus of our new suburban existence." She handed me a beer. "You're a nexus, all right. Come on, let's fire up the nexus before you write a sonnet about it." That first night was everything I'd dreamed of. We invited our friends, Mark and Jen, over. The burgers were perfectly charred. The kids ran around the yard with sparklers until they collapsed into a giggling heap on the grass, and the fire crackled and popped, sending embers spiraling up into the darkening sky. The smell of cedar smoke hung in the air, a scent that felt like home. We sat there for hours, talking and laughing, the warm glow pushing back the darkness. "This is it," Mark said, leaning back in his chair. You made it, man. The American dream. I looked at my wife, my friends, the beautiful new house behind us, and the fire burning brightly in front of us. He was right. It was the dream. It was a perfect, blissful, idyllic dream. And like all perfect dreams, it was about to be interrupted by the shrill, unwelcome alarm clock of reality, delivered in a beige envelope. Section 1.3. The Beige Envelope of Doom. It appeared a week later. It was sitting in our mailbox, nestled between a Pottery Barn catalog and a coupon for a free car wash. It was a plain, beige envelope, the color of cubicle walls and despair. The return address simply read, Creekwood Estates, HOA. Oh? Sarah said, peering over my shoulder as I opened it. That looks official. Did you forget to pay the dues? Paid 'em on day one, I said, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. The letterhead was aggressively formal. The font was Times New Roman, a typeface that has never been used to deliver good news. Dear resident of 112 Oakwood Lane, it has come to the attention of the Architectural and Environmental Committee that a potential violation of the Creekwood Estates Covenant has occurred on your property. Specifically, we have received reports of a recurring atmospheric anomaly, accompanied by a lingering olfactory disturbance. Please refer to Covenant Section 12, Article 4, Nuisances. This section prohibits any activity that may unreasonably interfere with the quiet enjoyment of another resident's property. We trust you will rectify this situation promptly. Sincerely, the Creekwood Estates HOA Board. I read it twice. Atmospheric anomaly? Olfactory disturbance? Do they think I opened a portal to another dimension back here? Sarah scanned the letter, her brow furrowed with concern. Leo, they're talking about the fire pit. No, I scoffed, though a cold dread was beginning to pool in my stomach. They can't be. Olfactory disturbance? That's the most ridiculously pretentious way of saying smells like a campfire I've ever heard. It has to be a mistake. Probably some automated letter. I don't know, Leo. HOAs are serious. Don't worry, I said, patting her arm with a confidence I didn't feel. I'll handle this. A polite, well-reasoned email will clear this whole thing up. I spent 20 minutes crafting my response, a masterpiece of diplomacy and gentle sarcasm. I explained that the anomaly was a standard, commercially produced fire pit, and the disturbance was the pleasant, universally loved aroma of burning wood. I assured them we only used it on weekends and were always mindful of our neighbors. I signed off with a cheerful, happy to clear up any confusion, and hit send. I leaned back in my chair, satisfied. The problem was solved. I had applied logic and reason to a simple misunderstanding. It was the last time in this entire saga that I would be so adorably, so hilariously wrong. My polite, well-reasoned email was answered with the digital equivalent of a brick wall. The reply came less than an hour later. Mr. Johnson, thank you for your clarification. Your fire pit has been noted. As per my previous correspondence, this constitutes a violation. A second notice is attached. Sincerely, Brenda Snodgrass. President Creekwood Estates HOA. Attached was a PDF, a formal second notice of violation. This one was more direct. It cited a new rule, one that hadn't been in the first letter. As per the newly ratified amendment of August 1st, all open-flame recreational fires are strictly prohibited due to concerns over smoke, safety, and community aesthetic standards. Newly ratified? We moved in July? I yelled at my monitor. Who is this Brenda Snodgrass? Oh, I think I know, Sarah said, walking into the office. She pointed out the window. That's her, the one who looks like she's about to write a ticket to that squirrel for loitering. I looked outside. A woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a beige pantsuit that matched our violation letters, was standing on the edge of her lawn. Her lawn, I should note, was not so much a lawn as it was a perfectly uniform green carpet that looked like it had been installed by NASA. In her hand was a tape measure, which she was using to verify the height of a blade of grass. I'm not exaggerating. I decided this digital back and forth was getting us nowhere. This was a situation that required the human touch, a face-to-face conversation. I would go over there, introduce myself, and explain things like a reasonable adult. Brenda was just retracting her tape measure with a satisfied snap when I approached her. "Brenda, hi. Leo Johnson from 112 Oakwood just moved in." I offered a friendly smile. She did not return it. Her eyes, the color of a cloudy sky, scanned me from head to toe, as if checking me for compliance. "Mr. Johnson, I'm aware. I trust you received my email." "I did, yes. That's what I wanted to talk about. Look, there seems to be a misunderstanding. It's just a fire pit. Families have been sitting around fires since, the invention of fire. It's a very normal, neighborly thing." Brenda's expression didn't change. It was like talking to a statue that had been programmed to enforce sprinkler regulations. "Mr. Johnson, the covenant is clear. Section 8, subsection 4B, as amended, states, all outdoor leisure activities involving combustion for the purpose of ambiance or personal enjoyment are strictly prohibited. Your fire pit falls under that." I blinked. The sheer audacity of the wording was breathtaking. Ambiance and personal enjoyment? Are we allowed to breathe if it brings us personal enjoyment? What if I'm using the fire for cooking? Is that allowed? A flicker of something, not quite a smile, but a smug tightening of her lips appeared. That would fall under Section 9, outdoor cooking appliances. All such appliances must be fueled by propane or natural gas and may not produce smoke deemed excessive by the committee. Wood is not an approved fuel source. "So my Weber kettle grill is also illegal?" I asked, my voice rising. "If it uses charcoal, yes, it would be in violation," she said without a hint of irony. I was flabbergasted. I was trapped in a conversation with a sentient rulebook. There was no appeal to common sense, no room for discussion. There was only the covenant. "Brenda, with all due respect, this is insane. We're talking about making s'mores in my backyard, not running a smelting plant." "The rules are the rules, Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice final. "They exist to protect the property values and quality of life for all residents. Your third and final notice will be arriving in the mail. After that, fines will be assessed daily. Have a pleasant afternoon." She turned and walked back to her perfectly symmetrical, perfectly joyless house, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, speechless. The war had begun. Section 2.2, the neighborhood divide. The next few weeks were tense. A black cloud, both literal and metaphorical, hung over 112 Oakwood Lane. My beautiful fire pit sat on the patio, covered and cold, a monument to my defeat. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The eerie uniformity of the neighborhood wasn't peaceful, it was enforced. One evening, while glumly taking out the trash, a guy from the house next door waved me over. He was a big, friendly-looking man with a genuine smile, which was a startling sight in Creekwood Estates. "You're Leo, right? I'm Dave," he said, shaking my hand. "Heard you had a run-in with the Dragon Lady." "Brenda, yeah, you could say that. She basically told me my pursuit of happiness was a code violation." Dave let out a booming laugh. "Sounds about right. Welcome to the neighborhood. Brenda's been running this place like her own little fiefdom for 10 years. Most of us just try to stay off her radar. You, my friend, flew a B-52 bomber right onto her radar." "All I did was light a fire." "Exactly," Dave said, leaning conspiratorially over the fence. "Brenda hates anything that feels uncontrolled. Fun, spontaneity, rogue smells. A few years ago she tried to get a rule passed banning wind chimes. said they were a non-sanctioned auditory intrusion. It was oddly comforting to know I wasn't alone. Dave became my secret ally, a friendly face in a sea of beige conformity. But for every Dave, there was a Gary. Gary lived in the house directly across from me. He was a small, balding man who seemed to have no job other than neighborhood watch. His blinds were always angled just so, allowing for maximum surveillance. Anytime I stepped outside, I could feel his eyes on me. If I left my garbage cans out for an hour too long on trash day, I'd find a neat, laminated note tucked under the lid, reminding me of the proper receptacle storage times. I had no doubt he was the one who made the initial olfactory disturbance report. He was Brenda's loyal stooge, her eyes and ears on the ground. The battle lines were being drawn. Section 2.3. The HOA meeting from hell. "You should go to the monthly meeting," Sarah urged one night. "Plead your case. Let the other neighbors see you're a reasonable person. Maybe they'll vote to change the rule." Her optimism was touching, but I knew it was a fool's errand. Still, I had to try. I had to handle this the right way before I resorted to the my way. The HOA meeting was held in the basement of the community clubhouse, a windowless room with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. It smelled of stale coffee and crushed dreams. About 20 residents were scattered around folding tables, looking bored out of their minds. Brenda sat at the head table, flanked by a treasurer who looked terrified, and Gary, who was acting as secretary and taking minutes with an almost religious fervor. The first hour was excruciating. A woman named Carol complained for 15 minutes about the Murphy family's basketball hoop, which she claimed was aesthetically discordant. A man argued that the approved shade of off-white for mailbox posts was too similar to the unapproved shade of eggshell. It was a symphony of pettiness, and Brenda conducted it with an iron gavel. Finally, she announced, "New business." My heart hammered. This was my chance. I stood up. "Hi, everyone. I'm Leo Johnson from 112 Oakwood. I'd like to propose a discussion about the recent amendment banning wood-burning fire pits." A collective sigh went through the room. I pressed on, making a passionate, heartfelt plea. I talked about community, about family traditions, about the simple joy of a campfire. I assured them I was safe, responsible, and considerate. I even threw in a joke about cavemen that got a few pity chuckles. When I finished, there was a brief, hopeful silence. Then Brenda spoke, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Thank you for your input, Mr. Johnson. The amendment was passed by the board in accordance with the procedures outlined in the covenant. The primary concerns were fire risk, as cited by the National Fire Protection Association, and smoke complaints impacting residents with respiratory issues. The board's decision is final. Is there any other new business?" It was a public execution. She didn't even allow for a discussion or a vote. She just shut me down. Gary was staring at me with a triumphant smirk on his face. I looked around the room for support, but everyone was studiously avoiding my gaze, suddenly fascinated by the linoleum floor. They didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to end up on Brenda's radar. I walked out of that basement defeated, humiliated, and filled with a cold, simmering rage. The right way had failed. The system was rigged. Fine. If they wanted to play by the rules, we'd play by the rules. I was just going to find a different set of rules to play by. My rules. That weekend, I told Sarah I was going to be busy. I locked myself in my home office with 2 pots of coffee, a legal pad, and the single most soul-crushing document known to man, the 247-page Creekwood Estates Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. Sarah thought I'd finally snapped. She'd peek in every few hours, asking if I needed anything, the way you'd talk to a man building a conspiracy board in his garage. "Honey, are you okay? You've been in here for 6 hours," she said on Saturday afternoon. "I'm fine, my love," I muttered, not looking up from the page. Did you know that our satellite dish cannot exceed a diameter of 1 meter? Or that any garden gnome is considered a non-approved lawn statuary and is subject to immediate removal? This document is a masterpiece. I was drowning in a sea of legalese and arbitrary decrees. There were regulations on fence heights, mailbox designs, the number of pets you could own, and the specific species of deciduous trees permitted for front yard planting. It was a blueprint for a world with no surprises, no individuality, and certainly no fun. I was about to give up, to admit defeat, and consign myself to a life of propane-fueled mediocrity. And then I saw it. It was on page 87, in the very section Brenda had quoted at me. Section 8, subsection 4b. I read the sentence that had become my personal nightmare. All outdoor leisure activities involving combustion for the purpose of ambiance or personal enjoyment, henceforth defined as recreational fires, are strictly prohibited. I stared at the words until they swam before my eyes. I had focused on the ambiance and personal enjoyment part, the sheer audacity of trying to legislate feelings. But I had missed the key, the linchpin, the beautiful, exploitable loophole. Recreational fires. The entire prohibition, the whole foundation of Brenda's tyranny, rested on that one single beautiful adjective. Recreational. My brain, the brain of an IT project manager who spends his days finding loopholes in technical specs and navigating bureaucratic red tape, suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree. What if the fire wasn't recreational? I jumped up from my chair and started pacing, my mind racing. What is the opposite of recreational? Professional, occupational, utilitarian. If the fire pit wasn't a toy for my amusement, what could it be? An appliance, a tool, a piece of equipment? Okay, Leo, think, I said to myself, grabbing a marker and heading to my whiteboard. What makes something professional? A purpose, a designation, official equipment, documentation. A plan began to form. A glorious, absurd, and technically legal plan. A fire pit used for fun was a recreational fire. But what if it were recontextualized? What if it were an outdoor heating element? A piece of professional-grade equipment requires a professional operating environment. What does a professional environment require? Safety protocols, proper lighting. Yes, lighting. Not just some charming string lights, but serious, undeniable, professional lighting. The kind of lighting that says, this is not fun, this is serious business. I looked at my whiteboard. At the top, I wrote the project title, Operation Blinding Light. A wide, manic grin spread across my face. Brenda wanted to play by the book? Fine, I was about to throw the entire library at her. Section 3.2, the contractor consultation. The next Monday morning, I started making calls. I needed an electrical contractor, but not just any contractor. I needed someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. After a few awkward conversations, I found a listing for HOA, Chet and Mike's Electric, no job too weird. Perfect. Chet and Mike's, this is Mike, a young, cheerful voice answered. Hi, Mike. My name is Leo Johnson, I began, trying to sound as normal as possible. I have a unique outdoor lighting project. I need a professional, commercial-grade lighting solution for a designated outdoor workspace on my residential property. There was a pause. A workspace? In your backyard? That's correct, I said smoothly. It involves the operation of some sensitive equipment that requires optimal, certified illumination for safety monitoring and documentation purposes. We're talking high-lumen, full-spectrum coverage. Another pause, longer this time. Okay. Chet and I can swing by this afternoon. What's the address? That afternoon, a slightly battered Ford F-150 pulled up to my house. 2 men got out. Chet was the older one, a grizzled man with a mustache that had seen things. He looked skeptical by nature. Mike was the younger guy from the phone, tall and lanky, with a look of genuine curiosity on his face. I led them to the backyard. "This is the designated operational area," I said, gesturing grandly towards my sad, covered fire pit. Chet stared at the fire pit, then at me, then back at the fire pit. "You want to light up your barbecue?" "This is not a barbecue," I corrected him gently. "This is a professional-grade solid fuel combustion-based heating element. And yes, it requires a very specific lighting setup for its professional operation." I unrolled a piece of paper on which I had sketched my vision. It showed my backyard, with 2 giant X's marking the spots. "I need 2 telescopic light towers installed, one here and one here. I'm thinking something like the kind you see on highway construction sites, something that can really illuminate the workspace." Chet and Mike looked at my drawing. They looked at each other. Mike was trying and failing to hide a smile. Chet just looked tired. "Son," Chet said slowly, taking off his hat and scratching his head, "you want to land a 747 in your backyard?" No, I explained patiently. "This is purely for operational safety. I've cross-referenced OSHA guidelines for nighttime work environments. We'll need at least 50-foot candles of illumination across the entire patio." "OSHA," Mike finally choked out, letting a laugh escape. "For your fire pit?" "For my heating element," I said, pointing a finger at him for emphasis. He immediately straightened up. "And yes, I'll need a dedicated 240-volt circuit run from the main panel, terminating in a commercial-rated weatherproof switch panel, something with a big, satisfying, industrial-looking switch." Chet squinted at me, his eyes full of a strange mix of pity and admiration. "This is about your HOA, isn't it?" I just smiled. He sighed and looked at Mike. Mike shrugged, a huge grin spreading across his face. "Customer's always right, Chet." Chet grunted. He pulled out a notepad and started scribbling. "All right, Mr. Johnson. Running a new 240-volt line, trenching, 2 concrete pads, 2 commercial-grade light towers. This is going to be expensive. Real expensive." He named a price that made my eyes water. It was more than the fire pit itself. It was more than all the furniture on our patio combined. "That's perfectly acceptable," I said without blinking. "When can you start?" Chet stared at me for a long moment, then slowly shook his head and chuckled. "I've been doing this for 30 years, kid. I've wired everything from a doghouse to a factory. But this is a first. We can start Thursday." As they walked back to their truck, I heard Mike say, "That guy is my new hero." It was the first victory I'd had in months. Thursday morning arrived, bringing with it the rumbling diesel engine of Chet and Mike's work truck. It was a beautiful, sunny day, perfect for the commencement of a project fueled by pure, unadulterated spite. The work was loud, messy, and glorious. They used a power auger to dig 2 deep holes in my perfectly manicured lawn, the sound of which sent my neighbor Gary into a tizzy. His blinds twitched like a nervous eye. A few minutes later, he was on his lawn, phone in hand, pretending to be taking a call but very obviously filming the proceedings. I gave him a cheerful wave and a thumbs up. Sarah watched from the kitchen window, her face a mask of horrified fascination. "Leo, what is happening? There are men digging up the petunias." "Progress, my dear," I called back, putting on the brand-new bright yellow hard hat I'd bought for the occasion. "This is the dawn of a new era of compliance." Dave from next door wandered over, a can of beer in his hand, despite it being 10 a.m. "Dude," he said, his eyes wide as he looked at the deep holes. "I thought you were kidding. You're really doing it." "Never joke about compliance, Dave," I said, tapping the clipboard I was holding. On it, I had printed out my crude sketch and labeled it Official Blueprint, Heating Element Illumination Project. Chet and Mike worked all day. They mixed and poured concrete into the holes, creating sturdy footers. They trenched a line from the house to the patio, laying thick orange conduit. Gary documented every single step from his window, presumably building a mountain of evidence for Brenda. Around 3 p.m., the main event arrived on a flatbed truck. 2 massive telescopic light towers, folded up like sleeping metal insects. The installation of the towers was a spectacle. My quiet little cul-de-sac had never seen such excitement. Other neighbors, drawn by the commotion, started peeking out their doors. They watched as Chet and Mike bolted the towers to the concrete pads and began wiring everything to a formidable-looking gray metal box on the side of my house. Inside that box was a single, huge, red switch. It looked like something you'd flip to activate a doomsday device. By 5 o'clock, they were done. The trenches were filled, the equipment was packed away. 2 10-foot-tall metal towers now stood like sentinels in my backyard. "All right, she's all wired up," Chet said, wiping his hands on a rag. "When you extend those poles and fire 'em up, you're going to be able to see this place from the space station. You're sure about this, kid?" "Absolutely," I said, writing them a check with a flourish. "Thank you for your professionalism." Mike clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't mention it. Seriously, this was the best job we've had all year. If you ever decide to install a moat, you call us." As they drove away, I stood on my patio, admiring my handiwork. The towers were an insult to landscape design. They were a grotesque industrial intrusion into the serene suburban landscape. They were perfect. Section 4.2, The Grand Unveiling. I waited until Saturday. The anticipation was killing me, but the timing had to be perfect. I needed the cover of darkness. I needed witnesses. That evening, I set up the scene. I cleaned the fire pit, the heating element, until it gleamed. I stacked firewood inside it in a neat, professional-looking pyramid. On a small folding table, I placed a fire extinguisher, for safety compliance, and the operating manual I had typed up and had laminated at Staples. The manual was 3 pages of glorious nonsense about pre-combustion checks, optimal fuel-to-air ratios, and lumen-assisted monitoring. I invited Dave over for the inaugural test. He arrived with a 6-pack, his face alight with the glee of a man about to watch his neighbor commit social suicide. Sarah refused to come outside, choosing instead to watch from behind the living room curtains like a hostage. "Distinguished guests," I began, gesturing to Dave, who was the sole member of my audience. "Tonight, we embark on a new chapter of outdoor thermal management. We will be conducting the first official, fully illuminated operational test of the HEAT 1000 system." "What's HEAT stand for?" Dave whispered, opening a beer. "Heating Element Advanced Technology," I whispered back. I extended the telescopic poles on the towers until they loomed a full 20 feet in the air, each one crowned with a bank of powerful LED floodlights. I took a deep breath, put on a pair of safety glasses, and walked over to the control panel. "Commencing illumination sequence," I announced to no one in particular. I flipped the big red switch. There was a loud click as a massive amount of electricity surged through the system, and then my world turned white. It was not light. It was a physical presence. It was a cleansing fire of pure, unadulterated photons. My lawn, previously cloaked in the gentle dark of evening, was now lit up with the intensity of the midday sun. Every blade of grass, every pebble, every trembling earthworm was visible in stark, unforgiving detail. The light spilled over the fences, blasting Dave's yard, Gary's yard, and Brenda's yard with its holy radiance. A flock of birds in a nearby tree, convinced the sun had just risen 3 hours early, began to chirp in confused panic. Dave just stood there, his beer halfway to his mouth, his jaw hanging open. "My God," he breathed, "it's full of stars." With the ceremonial lighting complete, I calmly walked over to the heating element, struck a match, and lit the kindling. The flames caught, small and orange, looking laughably inadequate under the glare of the artificial suns. It took less than 30 seconds. The first to appear was Gary, stumbling out of his front door in his bathrobe, shielding his eyes. "What in God's name is that?" he shrieked. Then came the final boss. Brenda Snodgrass marched around the side of her house, her face a thundercloud. She stopped at my fence line, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Johnson!" she finally roared, her voice cutting through the hum of the lights. "What is the meaning of this? You are in violation of Section 8 and Section 14, light nuisance." I calmly walked over to the fence, holding my laminated manual. I had prepared for this. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, Brenda," I shouted over the hum. "As you can see, this is not a recreational fire. This is a sanctioned, professionally illuminated operational test of my outdoor heating equipment. I'm following all documented safety protocols." "This is not a test. This is a disco," Gary screeched. "My dog thinks it's daytime. He wants to go for a walk." "I'm sorry for any confusion your dog may be experiencing," I said politely. "Perhaps you could explain the nuances of professional equipment operation to him." Brenda's face was turning a shade of purple I had previously only seen on eggplants. "I have read the covenant, Mr. Johnson. There is a clause against any lighting that interferes with a neighbor's property." "Ah, yes, Section 14, subsection 2C, I countered, tapping my manual. "It prohibits decorative or landscape lighting that spills onto adjacent properties. As you can clearly see, this is commercial-grade safety and operational lighting, which is not mentioned. It is therefore unregulated. If you'd like to file a proposal for a new amendment, the next meeting is on the first Tuesday of the month." Brenda was sputtering, rendered speechless by my weaponized pedantry. She finally found her voice. "That's it! I'm calling the police!" "Please do," I said with a serene smile, turning back to my fire. "I'd like to have a documented official assessment of my full compliance with all relevant statutes." I picked up a stick, put a marshmallow on the end, and began to roast it in the warm, legal, and blindingly bright glow of my victory. The flashing red and blue lights of the squad car seemed dim and pathetic under the thermonuclear glare of my backyard. 2 officers stepped through my back gate, their silhouettes stark against the blinding light. It was the moment the whole operation had been building towards. This brings us back to where we started. The older, weary cop, Officer Miller, according to his name tag, and his younger, mustachioed partner, Officer Richards, stood there, blinking like bewildered owls. "Sir," Officer Miller began again, his voice strained with forced patience. "Let me get this straight. You installed stadium lighting to reclassify your fire pit as a piece of professional equipment to get around your HOA?" "That's a bit of a simplification, officer, but it captures the spirit of the project, yes," I said calmly. I gestured to my laminated manual. "It's all about context. The HOA banned recreational fires. They did not, however, ban the professional operation of a solid fuel heating element in a safely illuminated environment." Officer Richards, the younger one, was now looking at my laminated manual. He had his hand over his mouth, but his shoulders were shaking. I was pretty sure he wasn't crying. Brenda, who was standing at the fence line with Gary, saw her opportunity. "He's violating light pollution ordinances and noise ordinances. That thing is humming," she yelled. Officer Miller held up a hand to silence her. He turned back to me. "Sir, your neighbors are alleging that you're violating city code." "I understand their concern, officer," I said, adopting my most helpful tone. Which is why, before embarking on this project, I took the liberty of reviewing Alexandria's municipal codes. The noise from the ballast is well under the 60 decibel limit for residential areas after 8 p.m. And as for the light, there is no ordinance regarding lumen levels, only that the light source cannot be aimed directly into a neighbor's window. As you can see, both towers are aimed straight down, in full compliance. Officer Miller stared at me. He looked over at the towers, aimed straight down. He looked at Brenda, whose face was collapsing in on itself with rage. He looked at Officer Richards, who had turned away and was now pretending to be intensely interested in a rose bush, his back shaking violently. Miller let out a long, slow sigh. He walked over to Brenda. "Ma'am, I understand you're frustrated, but as far as I can tell, he isn't breaking any city laws." But look at it," she sputtered. "I see it," he said, his voice flat. "It's very bright. But it's not a criminal matter. This is a dispute between you and him over your association's rules. It's a civil issue. You'll have to take it up with your HOA board." The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Brenda, the queen of the HOA, was being told to use the very system she controlled, a system I had just proven to be a joke. Her face went blank with the shock of utter defeat. Officer Miller turned back to me. He lowered his voice. "Look, Mr. Johnson, you've made your point. Brilliantly, I might add. But could you do me a favor and maybe dial it back a notch? The dispatch calls are getting weird." "Of course, officer," I said with a magnanimous nod. "The primary operational test is complete. I'll be powering down for the evening." He nodded, a glimmer of a smile finally reaching his tired eyes. "Thank you." As they walked away, I saw Officer Richards give me a subtle, almost imperceptible thumbs up over his shoulder. I walked back to my glorious red switch and flipped it off. The sudden plunge into darkness was just as dramatic as the light itself. The hum died, the birds went back to sleep, and the only light was the gentle, flickering, rebellious glow from my fire pit. I had won. Section 5.2, A Legend is Born. The story of the Night of the Illumination spread through Creekwood Estates like wildfire. The HOA convened an emergency meeting the very next day, from which a frantic, hastily worded email was sent out, announcing a new amendment that banned any and all forms of open-flame combustion, regardless of classification, recreational or otherwise. But it was too late. The damage was done. I had exposed the covenant for what it was, a collection of arbitrary words that could be twisted and turned by anyone with enough spite and a thesaurus. I became a minor neighborhood legend. People who used to just give a polite nod would now greet me with a wide grin and a knowing look. Dave started calling me the Luminary. Even Gary seemed to have a newfound, fearful respect for me. His blinds were still twitching, but with less judgmental energy. A few weeks later, Chet and Mike came and removed the towers. As I'd told them when I hired them, the installation was the point, not the permanent fixture. They did it for free, saying the story alone was worth the price of admission. That evening, I was sitting in my backyard. The air was cool and crisp. In the center of the patio, my fire pit was crackling away, a small, cheerful beacon in the gathering dark. On the grass next to the patio sat my final concession, my permanent victory flag, a single, comically small, solar-powered spotlight, the kind you use to illuminate a garden gnome, aimed directly at the fire pit. It cast a weak but defiant little beam. Sarah came out and sat next to me, handing me a beer. She looked at the fire, then at the tiny spotlight, and shook her head, a smile playing on her lips. "Was it worth it?" she asked softly. "The thousands of dollars? The eternal hatred of Brenda Snodgrass? The fact that we are now those people?" I looked at the flames, watching them dance and twist. I took a sip of my beer and held up a marshmallow on a stick, letting it toast in the gentle heat. I thought about the beige envelopes, the condescending meetings, and the sheer, unyielding tyranny of petty rules. Then I looked at the simple, perfect fire in front of me. "Honey," I said, turning to her with a grin, "some things are about more than money. They're about ambiance and personal enjoyment." I turned and raised my perfectly toasted marshmallow in a silent toast across the darkness toward Brenda's quiet, compliant, and perfectly joyless house. And in that moment it tasted like the sweetest victory I could ever imagine.